feel like I could talk for days about trees alone.
This is episode 32 of the Get in My Garden podcast. I'm Aaron Moskowitz, and today we visit again with Jon Romens, owner of Future Roots Regenerative Landscapes based in Santa Fe, New Mexico. He answers our questions about trees, weeds, and what to do in winter, how to build soil, and continue to think about our gardens and landscaping during the winter months. Jon introduces the idea of a different tree-focused perennial agricultural model to feed ourselves and our farm animals, how to use trees to stop erosion and to plan your landscaping properly, methods for farming drylands and managing water intelligently, and so much more. Please subscribe to the podcast and leave positive reviews on iTunes if you like the show. Also, it's really helpful if you share your favorite episodes on social media and within relevant Facebook groups. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy our chat.
You know, some things that we were talking about before as far as winterizing the garden is putting down, a nice layer of mulch for everything, leaving your leaves and letting those compost. And if you want to chop them up with some sort of device, lawnmower or what have you, that's always a good thing. It'll speed up the decomposition. But, you don't want to be hiring someone. Like, I encourage all of my clients to not hire me to remove their leaves and, take them to the dump, which I would usually just take them to my place and throw them in the compost pile anyways, but and it's kind of getting over that aesthetic of tidiness. We're kind of drawn to that, but sometimes just letting things go and kind of observing as far as cutting back, what dies completely back, what's producing seed, what seeds are drying at what time, if you're harvesting seeds and things like that in the fall, which is another thing that you can do.
And then you also were mentioning leaving leaves there, like on plants too. So
yeah. Like if I have a client that has a patio or something like that, I'll blow them all into the beds where the plants are growing. And you don't want to smother the plants, but they'll definitely appreciate the extra nutrients and the extra cover. The leaves will kind of act like a sponge through the winter when they get saturated with rain or snow, or depending on your climate. But the precipitation will kind of absorb into that organic matter, and then it'll be a slower release for the plants and almost like a layer of insulation on top too.
Yeah, and I heard also that there's a lot of microbial activity, so
yes,
that's going to really help, isn't it? And do you recommend people water on top of that?
You can. You don't necessarily want to be watering when the ground's totally frozen solid. It's probably not going to go down very far if it's that cold. It can also cause, if the ground is too saturated and then you get a really hard freeze, so paying attention to the weather channel or whatever, but you can get frost heave, which can actually push your plants out of the ground as the ground contracts and expands with temperature. So that's another thing to be mindful of.
Would that be like bulbs and rhizomes and things?
It can be anything. A lot of times it's new plantings.
I
something
see.
That's not as well rooted in, where it's just kind of a root ball coming out of a pot from a nursery or something like that.
Oh, okay. So that's from too much water. It gets in there and it just ejects it out of the ground.
Yeah. Well, just kind of like being mindful of when you're watering, how much you're watering. I like to do a really slow soak on all of my trees, especially fruit trees. If you're interested in utilizing any of that fruit at the end of the summer or whenever that happens, you want to make sure that they're hydrated through the winter. So probably every 3 to 4 weeks, I would give them a good long soaking. Is there anything like an inoculation that you would do for fruit trees in the winter? You can they make a lot of different granulated mycorrhizae kind of concentrates where it's a whole bunch of different strains all packed into one. I think you were mentioning the other day that a lot of plants have a specific association that they would make with a particular strain or species of mycorrhizae.
Right.
And so kind of that one size fits all where they pack a lot of different stuff into one supplement, especially if it's a densely planted bed or something like that. If you have shrubs and ground covers and trees all in one. You mean
get one of those products that has a big spectrum of fungi in there and then they throw it on there?
And if you're mulching, I would throw the mycorrhizal supplement down first and then mulch on top or leaves on top, whatever your preferences. And that's the other thing.
That's probably just a generally good tip, huh?
Yeah. And kind of going back to the leaves, you can always put the leaves on your bed and then put some nice looking mulch on top. If it's really gonna get you aesthetic wise to see all those messy leaves laying around all winter, then you can always touch it up and put a little topping of whatever your choice of mulch or gravel or what have you.
So what can you talk more about trees? I know you're reading a great book about trees.
Yeah, Tree Crops by J. Russell Smith. It's a very interesting perspective on trees and kind of the agroforestry mentality of really using trees to stabilize soil erosion. That's a great usage for trees. They do a very good job at it. But then also kind of stacking your functions within that thought. So you're creating shade, you're lowering temperature. Like I know in our last session we talked about cooling your house and the benefits of energy savings, but then also adding in the function of edibility or medicinal value. You know, if you're farther out on your if you have enough property to do so, you can do a sort of woodlot or something where you're actually harvesting lumber from that, or firewood, you know, like I know a lot of us in Santa Fe use our wood stoves through the winter. Right. And so that's a nice way to do that.
Were you the one who mentioned to me the possibility of eating only from trees?
Yeah. Yeah.
So what's that about?
So like this book that I'm reading, the Tree Crops book, he talks about butter supplements with like pecans and walnuts. And, you know, as far as getting fats, carbohydrates, proteins, all of that, there's a lot of different nut trees that can cover a lot of those bases. And then you have trees, fruit trees like your mulberry actually has some protein in it and carbohydrates. A lot of our land usage right now is in, you know, corn, soy, wheat, all those cereal grains that are often annuals as well. So you're kind of exposing that soil every year or unless you're cover cropping, which is a great practice, but trees are kind of a permanent cover crop that would just stabilize that soil, enrich the soil, the roots go in and start doing their thing and getting the microbial activity going.
So what would that look like if we moved a huge section of our crops away from cereal grains?
Right.
And what if we did find a way to do that with trees? Because trees, I mean, they're huge. So depending on what tree, you could get so much from one tree, right?
Right, right. And, you know, it'd probably be, well, totally depending on the species, but you can do some layering in it. I would think if you went full-blown commercial and you wanted to be harvesting at peak of it, like let's say you're doing honey locust, you know, like that grows really well here. We have a New Mexico locust that, you know, is a native, and honey locust does just fantastic as well. And those are actually, you know, they produce these long pods. They're leguminous. They don't fix as much nitrogen as some other legumes, but there is some nitrogen fixation that occurs. So you'd be harvesting all of these drying bean pods as they're falling and feeding them to ruminant animals. So instead of having your fields of corn or wheat or soy, whatever it may, you know, a lot of the corn goes to feedlots, right? And instead of maybe creating bushels of corn or bags or sacks or whatever, it's now bean pods from a tree. So using the different types of crops, and obviously some are better, like a mulberry. If you wanted to feed your chickens or your pigs mulberries, it'd be more effective to probably have that tree on your property as the farmer. But if you want to have your animals moving around and room to graze and roam, you can just kind of incorporate trees into that landscape rather than your stereotypical pasture. You might have a copse of trees somewhere and then some grassland, you know, kind of mixing it up a little bit more.
Yeah, that makes sense. More fun too.
And it also enables you to do a lot more on varying elevations.
That's a great
different
point.
Slopes. So right now, you know, you can't really you can do corn on a slope, but you're going to lose a lot of your soil.
So you're saying you plant your trees throughout the different terrain and then maybe it's tiered or whatever, but that's going to prevent the erosion and make it more possible to get a variety of foods for your animals.
Again, it's that perennial nature of it that really protects your soil. Those roots aren't going anywhere. And if you think about from a labor aspect, you're only planting it once. You know, you might have some die off from something or another, but also increasing your diversity of plantings will help mitigate pest and disease issues, I would think. So
corn, wheat, all that, the whole crop is removed every single year.
Correct, yeah. Yeah, well, and it's very interesting, you know, in a lot of cases, crops like beans that are conventionally grown are actually sprayed with an herbicide directly before harvest because that will kill off the entire plant. Then you come through with your combine or your, you know, gigantic machine and pick it all up, and they fall out much more easily when they're dried. So they'll be killed, dried, and then harvested.
And you're talking about glyphosate, right?
Glyphosate, yeah. I mean, I think that's more of during the growing phase that's applied, you know. But there's plenty of other things that you don't necessarily want on your food or the food that's going to the animals that we eat.
And I bet that having more perennials in your yard is going to prevent, like if you do have residue from other people who might have owned the property before you, who are using herbicide and pesticides, then maybe having the fungi around the roots in perennial plants is going to help mitigate that, maybe remove it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the fungi, the earthworms, all of those different things that are happening, a lot of that's able to process the undesirable things that are maybe in your soil, lingering from before, or, accidentally. Like we just had this flood back in July, and that, I know that washed a lot of stuff into our soils. So I'm kind of thinking about the myco-remediation, doing mushrooms or things like that. How can I get more of that activity going and more things eating the things that are undesirable in my soil and processing that?
Can you speak a little bit more about water?
Yeah, water, it's super important. We all need it. We're all made of it in some regard, or most things on the planet.
But I mean, the property in New Mexico being a very sunny, dry place, it's literally the value of land will be tenfold or 20-fold if you're next to a river or an acequia, right? So, I mean, but are there technologies that make it so that we really in this day and age can farm anywhere?
I think that it's really going to be back to that perennial agriculture model where you have those permanent roots. You have, trees will actually stretch the roots down so far that they're bringing up nutrients and water, and they create more of that vertical mobility within your soil. So all of those plants, maybe even more so than grasslands, but kind of getting your surface to where, I'm a big fan of mulch. I'm sure a lot of folks heard about that in the last episode I was here for. And, that's just one of the best ways. It's nothing really new, just increasing that sponginess of your soil. And so then when you get rain, the soil is utilizing it rather than all of it running off and turning into a flash flood like we had back in July.
Right, and we're just so sandy sometimes that we need that organic matter for anything to grow. But I mean, also the variety of naturally occurring microbes in all plants, right? So if you mulch everything, then the variety of local microbes that could take root in your yard and thrive are going to be much greater.
Totally. Yeah, and other things like doing small-scale earthworks, like little catchment structures like berms and swales or things like that. Brad Lancaster over in Arizona does a lot of really cool stuff with rainwater harvesting. And one of the things that, I think it was him that kind of coined this phrase, but it's slow it, spread it, sink it. So as the water comes down, you want to really stop it where it is. You want it to go down as far as it can go, and you want to spread it out, decrease the velocity of it, and kind of that sheet flow effect that might end up taking some of your soil away. So as far as farming in drylands and things like that, I think it's really about creating that addition of organic matter into your soil and then managing where your water goes and just avoiding runoff at all costs, trying to capture all of that.
So it's all about roots.
Yeah.
Now in your business, are you helping a lot of people with water-related problems?
Yeah. Actually, I've done quite a bit this season, especially post-flood in July. There were quite a few folks who had damage to their house, water in the home, things like that, or they just realized what happens when we get an event, like a quote-unquote 1,000-year event like we got. Because you really don't think about it. You can be at a property for 50 years, and all of a sudden you have something happen, and you never designed for it, you never thought about it. So I tend to over-engineer a lot of things as far as working with clients, so that way we never get disappointed and have something fail on us.
So what would that look like?
Some of the things that I'm doing now, like pumice wicks, are a really cool thing. So you can kind of you put gutters on the house, or however you're capturing the roof runoff, and then that will go down into a PVC tube that goes down into the ground at a slope, and so that all is sunk in a trench below the ground and lined with some sort of permeable deal that's going to keep roots out, but it's also going to let the water out. So as the water goes into this PVC pipe, there's holes drilled down the length of the pipe, and it can escape. So kind of think French drain.
I was just going to say it.
But then it's in a 2x2 trench that's filled with volcanic pumice, which we're very fortunate. The Jemez Mountains near here are one of the only locations that is kind of occurring. So it's a local resource for us, which is kind of nice. You don't have to have it shipped in from across the world, but it's mostly airspace.
Yeah.
So then as that water drains out from the PVC tube, it's going to fill up that trench, and then it's going to slowly leach out to your plants over time. If you get a big rain, it might fill up that trench, and then it might not fully dry dry out inside the trench for 2 months.
Wow, and it also seems like it might be the perfect vehicle for microbial growth, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, because then you can get a really luscious root zone going around, the edges of that trench. So you can do that into a planting bed. You can do it underneath raised beds, all sorts of different things, and then you would ideally plant around that, and the roots can kind of stretch and get that moisture as it comes out of the trench.
So cool.
Yeah.
So I personally am very interested in landscaping, ornamentals as well. But what about for using those methods for growing food?
Oh, it's I mean, it's been done with raised beds where you just have kind of a little fill-up hole sticking up out of, like a little pipe sticking up out of your raised bed. And so, once a week or once a month, whatever it may be, depending on how big you design the trench to be, you can have a full reservoir, a pumice reservoir below your raised bed, which I know a lot of people like the raised beds here just because our soil tends to be alkaline, maybe a little bit depleted of, probably a lot of depleted of a lot of things, but particularly organic matter. And so sometimes it's easier to just start from scratch, throw in some good soil, and then kind of keep that going for vegetable production.
Animals that love to nibble.
Right, yeah. But yeah, so you can do one of those like a micro pumice wick just underneath that bed. And then the roots will kind of stretch down throughout the season, and you still do have to water on top as well. But once you get towards the end, when you really want all the fruit and the goodies to develop, all your peppers and tomatoes, you want them to have that water, and the roots are more established.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
I wonder what would happen if you had that pumice wick underneath hoop house.
Yeah.
Because you could create your own microenvironment, probably not even have to water it. I don't know.
That's actually really interesting. I don't know if I haven't heard of that been done, but
because in my friend's hoop house, it literally rains.
Yeah.
It gets pretty hot. So I mean, but during those times they cross ventilate, but it still contains so much moisture in there.
Yeah.
And the runoff goes into, I mean, it could go into those underground pumice.
Totally, yeah. Well, I mean, I'm sure that would do wonders for the humidity levels, too. If you wanted to do something like ginger or turmeric or, something a little more exotic in a controlled environment, and also for our extremely dry winters, But another application that those have been used for is actually gray water and black water processing as well.
Similar to like a septic?
Yeah. If you want to go, the off-grid route and kind of just have your own setup as far as your septic, it's not necessarily storing everything in a tank that has to be pumped, but you would direct it all out via one of those deals. And I don't install those for clients, unfortunately. Not yet, anyways.
One day.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing to think about, because then you also get, that breakdown. Again, you're putting something maybe less desirable in your soil, but through the biological processes that are occurring, microbial and root-wise and otherwise, you're processing all of that into something that's very beneficial.
We're very cutting edge, I think, in New Mexico. At least it seems like it, with gardeners and water systems, right? Otherwise, it could be literally running out of water. And so the systems that people have to use also, I mean, they might have financial reasons for doing that, but maybe we're also going to be cutting edge eventually on black water.
Right. Well, I mean, there's a lot of cultures that have developed systems for treating black water due to isolation or things like, you think about your composting toilets and all of those things, but it really can be quite a beneficial substance as long as you handle it properly and don't expose yourself to pathogens that might be harmful.
I actually heard that a lot of people build outhouses and don't know what they're doing, and they don't cross-ventilate the bottom part, and they explode.
Wow.
Have you heard about that?
Is that from the methane then?
Yeah.
I haven't. I mean, well, and then you think about biodigesters. What if you could hook up, are you familiar with those at all?
Is that like a very microbially active thing that you could put anything into?
Well, it's like a giant balloon. So you would kind of funnel all of your black water and what have you, all of that stuff with that's rich in that methane that's going to be released, and you literally capture it in the balloon above the tank that you're holding it in. I worked at a farm down in Costa Rica that harvested all of the methane from their dairy, their pigs, their sheep, all of that. And well, actually, it was one of my jobs to make sure that whole system was running smoothly, but it was a series of almost think like a rainwater cistern collection where you have all of your little downspouts or canales coming off the house, draining to into a cistern. It was like that, but from each of the different barns, and then all of their cooking gas was methane.
That's amazing. I've heard about that, and I know in Washington State they're doing that on the garbage dump. They're collecting in a large scale, but I never could understand, or I at least didn't really believe that they could collect enough off of that, but maybe they can. So what was happening in Costa Rica?
I mean, it was enough to run like a fully functional, I'm not exactly sure as far as the volume, but it was running a fully functional kind of eco lodge, intentional community type deal, and there was probably 150 to 200 people there, between volunteers, employees, guests, all of that. It was cooking 3 square meals a day with zero input besides what came from the animals. So
wow, so just animal waste, nothing else?
Yeah, and then once all of that has brewed for a while in that vat, you would pump that out into a little tanker and take that out into the fields and spray that as a fertilizer for the cattle.
How cool.
Out in the pasture. So
wow,
pretty interesting. Yeah.
So subject of different types of trees, I think that would be interesting, because you did mention some people do use wood off their own property for fuel for their house to warm it in the winter.
Right.
It seems like one would need like a lot of space for that to happen, right?
Yeah.
But maybe a variety of trees that they could plant. Some are going to be for food, a variety of different trees that work at a lot of different climate zones, something like that.
I mean, basically with trees and forests and all of that in general, like you can kind of get into different types or biomes, of naturally occurring species that like to hang out together. But I think general rule of thumb is just the more biodiversity, the more resilient your landscape's going to be, the more uses you're going to get out of it, and quite frankly, the more beautiful it's going to be too. You have all of these different things happening, but you think about what are our needs. You have food, fuel, fiber, medicine, all of those all of those things can come from trees. And so you might do like here we have the Russian olives and the Siberian elms, which are very pervasive. I'm kind of a fan of them just because it's shade, and we need shade, and we need roots in the ground, like we were talking about
and
earlier.
Aren't they good for your animals?
They are good for your goats. Love Siberian elm, actually. It's very interesting. But if you ever, I don't know if there's any here, but I know that some folks are doing goatscaping now.
Oh yeah, we had Amanita Thorpe was on the podcast. She has a horned locust goatscaping company. She has like a huge herd of goats.
That's really cool. I always kind of joked about that, and then I found out that it was actually a real thing, and it works, which, I'm sure they do a fantastic job.
Oh, yeah. I just think that there's a huge problem with spraying chemicals in the areas where they need goatscaping the most. It might be, like she was hired by Eldorado, but they've already used chemical remediation. So I don't know what will happen to, she's probably waiting
a few years to do that job.
Exactly.
Interesting. But so kind of back to what we're using the trees for, some of those invasives might be desirable to just, you might let them go. Like I'm letting a lot of, I'm kind of planting an understory for the future for myself of edible things, fruits and nuts and all of that. But as far as the invasives, why not let them, continue to shade and create this microclimate, and then when you're ready, you can cut them down and use that for wood, use that for fuel for the winter or tool handles, or it's going to depend on the species obviously as far as what uses you can get out of them. And actually I realized last year that Russian olive does smell quite strongly when burned.
Oh really?
Not in a pleasant way, but if it's all going up the chimney, then it doesn't really bother me too much.
I mean, that's a lot of labor, of course. So someone listening who's homesteading, they're going to be like rolling their eyes. I don't need to go spend all my days cutting down wood.
Right. Well, and it's more of it's a byproduct of the design process, I'm finding. So if you want to ultimately create some sort of food forest or edible landscaping at your place, and you have all of this super dense, can't even walk through it forest, why not utilize that rather than, what else do? You chop it down, take it to the dump? Do you chop it down and make piles and burn it? Like I grew up in my family where we would go out and trim trees, and we would cut back the invasives, the good old buckthorn up in Wisconsin, and you would just make these huge burn piles, and you're not even burning it in your house, you're just burning it to get rid of it.
But is it producing anything that's beneficial for the garden, like the char?
I mean, it does a little bit, yeah. Although here, if you were to burn something on that scale, all of that wood ash would actually alkalize your soil, I believe. So further alkalize the soil. So I don't really see it as a desirable option for New Mexico.
That makes sense.
But Yeah. Other places maybe so. If you have insanely acidic soil, or you wanted to collect the ash or make biochar or something like that. But, so my thing is I just kind of go along, pile it up, and then come back through and cut it into firewood-sized pieces. And a lot of my clients don't have a wood stove or something like that, but I do a lot of juniper and pinon trimming just for fire safety, trimming up the lower ladder branches.
Is it easy to do chip? Because isn't that a good ground cover to...
Oh, well, I mean, it's very easy once you have the chipper, but chippers tend to be very expensive to rent and also tend to have a lot of mechanical issues.
So you're not doing that for people? You're avoiding it?
I have done it for my property, just for the first few years that we've been there, because we had so much wood that there was no way we were going to burn through it, and we did have some depleted soil areas where I wanted to add organic matter. So it made sense, I kind of got some of the neighbors volunteered to help, and you just feed everyone and get a big crew together and just keep shoving it through. But for your typical homeowner, if you only have 2 or 3 trees that need trimming, you're probably better off making kindling or firewood out of it rather than chipping it. We have all that nice free mulch from the dump, or our transfer station here, which I'm a big fan of. Oh yeah,
that's right. So you did mention that before. So you can go there and people are dropping off their yard waste, right? So people who they're not on board yet with keeping the leaves, you can literally, if you don't have trees, go and get the leaves yourself.
Right. Well, and we talked about how it kind of speeds up that decomposition process when they're chopped up. Well, the dump is running it all through an industrial-sized chipper for free, and then you just show up, and if you want to, pay a little bit, they'll load you. If you don't want to pay for it, then you just go and hand load it.
It's amazing.
And if you don't have a truck, find a neighbor who has a pickup truck or rent a U-Haul or whatever it may be.
You could literally load your whole yard up and then be good to go.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm a big fan of that. I kind of just, we don't have trash service where I live, so every time I take my trash to the dump, I just go through and pick up a yard and a half or 2 of mulch and just make piles and kind of just keep this continuous mulching process going, because I really don't think you can ever have too much mulch, especially in New Mexico.
Totally.
So
makes sense. Well, so one last thing that came to my mind is when I was at the farmer's market, they would constantly reject the idea of getting landscaping plants because I was selling landscaping plants, and they were like, well, first of all, our soil's messed up, nothing will grow. I mean, that people will say that, which I roll my eyes at, because I mean, there's simple ways that you can get things to grow. And then also they say rabbits or gophers. Rabbits might, or deer. So like, what are do people complain about the animals to you, and what do you suggest to those people?
Yeah, so depending, I've noticed that it's very dependent on our precipitation as far as the year goes. Like last year we had kind of that drought, and then we had a good monsoon season, but the gopher pressure was unbelievable last spring.
Because they were starving, right?
I've never had, and the plants are probably slowing down with less water. There's just less stuff to eat, less of the annual weeds that we think of popping up in the spring and things like that are not coming up because they're not getting good rains, or there wasn't a good snowpack, or whatever it may be. So then they're going to turn to the homeowner who has this nice irrigated landscape with all these, it's kind of like a all-you-can-eat salad bar. But so one thing that I recommend to people is using blood meal. It's actually, I believe it's a byproduct of the cattle industry, and it's actually just dehydrated powdered blood.
Oh, okay.
And so it does add, I believe it's a low dose of nitrogen, and maybe some phosphorus too. I'm trying to remember exactly what it is, but regardless, it's a low enough dosage that you can apply it pretty liberally and not worry about shocking any plants or burning anything. Herbivores really don't like the smell of blood, so it does not attract them at all. So you kind of walk through the yard and throw that down, give everything a little dusting, and then when the gophers come, it smells not like their food.
Okay.
It smells like something that a carnivore might like.
So I'm reading right now, it says that it's 1200, so it's super nitrogen rich.
Yeah, although 12 is, it's not going to blow anything out of the water as far as your plants that are already there and established. Maybe don't go so heavy on it with the new plantings, but you can kind of do like a little perimeter walk. It's not very expensive. Just get a bag of it, grab it by the handful, and just sprinkle it in kind of a little invisible fence around your yard, and that should help with a lot of stuff. If there's any problem plants in particular, you could maybe do a second application in the immediate vicinity of that plant. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of just a natural process, and I try to think, like in permaculture, they always say the problem is the solution. So if you're just super upset with it, try and look up plants that gophers maybe aren't attracted to. Like I know daffodils are toxic to them, so you can use those as kind of, they'll call it a barrier plant or a fortress plant, and you can plant that around something else to deter things from going at the more desirable plant. But it's just one of those things where it's part of nature, and they're aerating the soil. They're actually making great tunnels for when you get rain. If you think about it, that rain can just cruise right down those tunnels, and
you should fill the tunnels with pumice rock.
You could, yeah, maybe you could hire them. I don't know, but yeah, so it does have some positive effects, especially with precipitation, getting the moisture down farther.
That makes sense. Well, the redneck listeners, if there are any, they're going to think that the problem is the solution. They're going to start eating the gophers.
I don't know. We'll have to see how that goes for somebody. My name is Jon Romens, and I'm the owner of Future Roots Regenerative Landscaping, and we do a little bit of everything. We do stormwater management, passive water catchment, hardscape, softscape, irrigation, anything you can think of landscape related. And also, if you just want to talk about your landscape, we're happy to come out and just consult and talk plants. And I'm a bit of a plant nerd myself, so it's
awesome.
If you can't tell.
And you create raised bed gardens for people.
Absolutely, yeah. It's really great to see a lot of people more interested in growing their own food and kind of returning to self-sufficiency, which I'm a big fan of.
Well, you did mention designing cement.
Yeah, we do a lot of custom stonework, and we're kind of a design, install, and maintain. So we'll do everything the whole way through. If you just have a blank slate, we're happy to help with that. If you have an already established landscape and want to add something, a water feature or a patio or anything like that, we're always happy to help. We do a lot of stuff in the Santa Fe area, so El Dorado, Tsuke, down Rio Rancho area. My phone number is 608-212-3311, and our email is futurerootslandscapes@gmail.com.
Awesome. Thank you, John.
Cool. Thanks, Aaron.